Hey everybody, I'm Tirza.
Hey, I'm Brandon.
And we are a couple. We've been together almost 18 years, right? I think.
It feels longer.
Yeah, especially these days. It feels really long. So we just wanted to share a little bit of things that, people have told us over the years. And our marriage is by no means perfect. It's pretty close. But we have a lot of things to learn, but we wanted to share a little bit with you. One of the things we were talking about is this idea of expectations within marriage. And I think we came back to when we were married really, really early as wee children.
22-year-olds
yeah,
when we got married.
I think we were 23. I can't remember. It was a long time ago. Anyway, I had this idea. We lived in this cute little duplex in rural North Carolina. And I had this idea that wives were supposed to have gardens, and I think it was probably this passing comment that we saw somebody else with a duplex and we commented on, oh, that's a cute garden. And I suddenly had this expectation or this belief that Brandon wanted me to have a garden. And so I don't know a thing about gardening. My parents don't garden. And I thought, okay, I'm going to buckle down and I am going to fulfill this expectation that Brandon actually hadn't even given me, but I just assumed.
So we were at Home Depot and we were super poor, right? Young married couple, poor. We were in school together, and we were at Home Depot and we have hundreds of dollars of gardening stuff in our cart. And before we check out, we somehow get to this conversation that I don't really want to garden, and
I don't really
doesn't want to garden. And we were like, why are we buying all this stuff? And we ended up leaving. And that was kind of our first notion of yeah, you should probably spend some time talking about expectations. And so I think for me, one of the funniest things is in our marriage counseling, our counselor asked us to kind of list things that you hated doing, right? As far as chores.
Yeah, like chores. And
things that you didn't mind doing. And so one of the things that I listed on my side was that I didn't mind taking out the trash. I'm a very, something is a problem and then it's taken care of and then it's done, right? I kind of like closure. And so I was like, yeah, it's overflowing. You take it outside and it's done. And so probably a year, maybe 2 years.
So I didn't take out the trash.
Yeah, 2 years into our marriage.
I loved taking out the trash.
So 2 years into our marriage, Tirza's stacking trash on top of trash. I'm like,
it's a little bit of an exaggeration.
Honey, what is going on here? Take it out. And she's like, but you love taking out the trash. To which I said, I don't love taking out the trash. This is not my identity. This is something I don't mind doing, but I'm certainly willing to share it with you.
I don't want to take the joy
when it's needed. And just having these notions of if you never take the time to talk about what you expect, then no one can ever live up to it, right?
Yeah, I think that's a really important thing, that if you already have a narrative in your mind about the way that something's going to be, about the other person or about what you think the other person thinks about you, if you never clarify that and you never sit down and talk about it, then it's just going to perpetuate, usually negatively, because you hardly ever think somebody thinks nice things about you.
Yeah. So during COVID, right? So I normally work from home, and normally my wife and kids are elsewhere. And so I tend to have a structured day, but sometimes I get these 30-minute to 60-minute windows, and I have developed the habit over the last 2 years of going for a run, right? I have this kind of free window. And so about a month ago, Tirza was downstairs homeschooling kids and helping them set up. And I had a 60-minute window, and I came downstairs and I announced, I am going for my run. Apparently not communicating expectations of what quarantine looks like is problematic. And we had a good conversation that night. We tried to talk about it somewhat quickly.
Well, and it was only a good conversation because I'm not a good communicater. I keep things in. My family didn't really talk about stuff. And Brandon's learned over the 18 years that he asks, and I tried to learn to communicate, even though it's the last thing in the world I want to do.
Yeah, so it's listen, I felt like you were upset with me earlier. I didn't realize that I was doing something wrong, right? I had 60 minutes where you thought I would be upstairs, and I didn't need to be upstairs. And so I was using that in just a different way. And so even that little kind of check-in, a little 2-minute check-in in the evening, with the desire to be closer, right? And to be on the same team of, like, what does it look like when we have free time? And so from that point on, I've gotten a run every day in quarantine, and Tears has gotten a walk. But it takes some kind of conversations, right? And like, when will you take your walk? When will I take my run? Small little change, right? Just being on the same page, that being off doesn't mean that I'm off unless that we've kind of cleared it with each other. So
yeah, and I think that translates into deeper things too. That communicating what your expectations are for your future, for your job, for how you're going to parent, how you're going to respond when people are uncomfortable around, if you're family dynamics, with each other's families, all of those things. We may be close as spouses, or you might be close with your partner, but people aren't mind readers, and to assume and put a narrative or a story on somebody else is always detrimental, rather than asking how somebody is doing and being willing to be vulnerable to share how you are doing and how you are feeling. And that's one of the hardest things, to step into that vulnerability, because you're afraid that other person might not accept you for who you are. And I think that's tricky, because that requires a level of trust that really is baby steps, because we wouldn't have had that conversation when we first got married.
So I think my final thoughts on this is, obviously a famous book came out a couple years ago called Wonder, and one of the things in Wonder said you can either choose to be right or kind. And technically speaking, right, I was right that hour should have been blocked off for In Tears Is Mine. She knew I had a meeting from 11 to 12. When that student call was canceled, I was technically right. I still should have had that time off. And so me choosing to be right actually hurts the cause, because I could have chosen to be kind. And as parents, we always are helping our kids kind of navigate this. And so today, my youngest got a football that one of the other kids owned, and the kid that owned the football rightly pointed out that this was their football, and they should have they have the right to keep it for themselves. And so we had a really cool conversation, and the three of us, of saying, there's nothing wrong with saying this is my football, but you could have chosen something different. And so I think that in this kind of crazy time, there's a lot of like justification in being right, but we can also choose
kindness, and the benefit of the doubt.
It works well.
Choose to think the best. It works out better.
Be well.